students, in this video we are going to study the structure of an operating system. So before studying the structure of an operating system, you should know what do you mean by kernel here. Okay, so what is kernel? So in the first video we have studied, that is in introduction video, we have seen one components of a operating system. So in that I have mentioned the term kernel. So what is that kernel here? The kernel is nothing but it is the central part, or you can say the central component of our computer. So what it does, it acts as a bridge. Okay, so it acts as a bridge between the applications and the actual data processing. Okay, so it acts as an interface between the user applications and the hardware. So what is the kernel here? Kernel is the central component of our computer. Okay, so it acts as an interface between the user applications and the hardware. So why we need to, or what is the use of your kernel? So kernel is going to manage, or kernel is going to do the communication between the software and the hardware. So software means our applications, and the hardware means our resources like CPU, disk, memory, etc. So when when a process makes a request to the kernel, the request is called as the system call. So already you have studied the system call. So when kernel is going to do what? So whenever the process is going to make a request, then in that time it is going to take that request. So that is nothing but the system call. So various kernel designs are going to be differ in the various types of structure. So according to, only in the structure of an operating system there is a difference between the kernel. So hence we should know the what do you mean by kernel. So in next we should study the various types of structures of an operating system. So there are three types of operating system, that is three structures of an operating system. One is monolithic structure, second is layered structure, third is microkernel structure. So we'll see first one, that is monolithic structure. So in this type, here a monolithic kernel is an operating system architecture where the entire operating system is going to be work in a kernel space. So what is this kernel space here? Again in the second video I have studied, I have explained the user mode and the kernel mode. Okay, so in this monolithic kernel, the entire operating system is going to be work under the kernel space. Okay, and it is alone in the supervisor mode. So what it is going to do, a set of primitive or the set of system calls are going to be implemented in this operating system services. So it is one of the oldest architecture used for while developing the operating system. So how the processes are going to be executed, or the system calls are going to be executed. So here for any system call, first it has to do the invoke, and later it has to switch from user mode to the kernel mode, and then it is going to transfer the control to the operating system. So how the it is going to work here? First it has to invoke the system call, and then it has to switch from user mode to kernel mode, and then it transfers the control to the operating system. So this is the monolithic structure. Next, in layer structure. So in this structure, the OS is going to be split into the various number of layers, or you can say levels, like layer 0 to layer n. Okay, so here in this structure the operating system has been splitted into the number of layers or the levels. So each layer is going to perform the different functions. Okay, so each layer is going to okay, next each layer can interact with the below layers here. Okay, each layer can interact with the one just above it and the one just below it. Lowermost layer is going to be directly deals with the a hardware, and it mainly mean to perform the functionality of input output communication. Okay, so here in this, according to the diagram, the layer 0 is what it is going to perform. The layer 0 is going to perform the functionality related to the hardware. So similarly layer 1 is there, and similarly layer n. So the last most layer is going to perform the user interaction, or you can say the user interface here. So what it means here, the lower layers are going to communicate with the upper layers. Okay, so here an operating system, in this operating system, what is the main advantage of this layered approach here? The layers are going to be selected so that each layer is going to perform the certain functions, as I told now. So each layer is implemented with only those operations provided by the lower level layers. A layer does not need to know how these operations are implemented. Okay, so it is just going to perform the operation. It does not worry about how that function or how that operation is going to be implemented. So what is the main difficulty under this layered approach? It involves the various layers, as I told. So it is very difficult to develop the number of layers. You should already know how many layers we are going to build under that operating system. Okay, so next is one more problem in this layered approach is it is very less efficient than the other types of structure. So for example, whenever the program is going to execute an input output operation, it has to execute a system call that is trapped to the input output layer. So which is which is going to call the memory management, then again it is going to call the CPU scheduling, and so on. So it takes here the time more, so hence it is less efficient than the others. So in layered approach, so as I told here, an operating system layer is an implementation of an abstract object made up of data and the operation that can manipulate those data. So one more thing is the debugging is very easy. Why? Because whenever the one layer is going to have an error, the entire operating system is not going to be checked. Only that particular layer we are going to debug. Okay, so whole operating system is not going to suffer here. Okay, so next is microkernel structure. So in this diagram I have mentioned the both microkernel and the monolithic kernel. So as I told, in monolithic, the whole thing or the work is going to be done by the only kernel mode. So there are two modes under the operating system. One is user mode and kernel mode, that we have already discussed in the second video. Okay, so in monolithic all the work is going to be performed by the kernel mode. So coming to the microkernel, so as the name itself indicates, the microkernel means we are going to have the smaller kernel under this structure. So as you can see here, this method structures the operating system by removing all the non-essential components from the kernel, and we are going to implement the system and the user programs. So hence it is going to have the smaller kernel. So as you can see here, in monolithic kernel we are having the different VFS system calls, IPC, file system, virtual memory. So all this has been scheduled under a single layer, that is basic IPC virtual memory scheduling. So that has been compressed in a smaller kernel. So hence the name is a microkernel here. So what is the main function of this microkernel? It is going to provide a communication facility. So how it is going to provide the communication? So whenever the two processes are executing, they need to communicate with each other. So how they are going to communicate? By using the concept message passing. Okay, so for example, if the client program wants to access a file, so it must interact with the file server. Okay, so the client program and the service never interact directly. So they need to communicate indirectly by exchanging the messages with the microkernel. So the next one more advantage you can see here. So we can easily extend our operating system because we are using here a smaller kernel. So all the new services or whatever the new functionalities we are going to add under this microkernel operating system, they are not going to affect our the whole operating system. So hence the extending of operating system is very easy, you can say here. Okay, and it also provides the more security and reliability. So hence the more services are going to be most services are running as user rather than the kernel processes. So if a service is going to fail, then rest of the operating system is not going to be harmed here. So these are the three structures of operating system: monolithic and layered architecture, and sorry, not architecture, layered structure, and the microkernel. Thank you.